Today is Nowruz, the Persian New Year, and these are not fireworks. Iran's stocks of missiles may be dwindling, but they're still lashing out across the region, at energy infrastructure in the Gulf or at Israel. The idea is to make President Trump choose between protecting Israel or saving the world economy.
Oh my Lord!
12 minutes after the ballistic missile leaves Iran, it arrives in the skies above Jerusalem, shot down by an interceptor. Last night, 3 alerts in 1 hour.
Oh my God!
Every time, everyone heads for the nearest bunker before going upstairs again. The Israeli government says the target was a cabinet meeting.
Allahu Akbar!
Perhaps Iran is now trying to kill Israeli leaders, even as they continue to bury their own. This was the funeral of intelligence chief Ismail Khatib, killed by Israel on Wednesday. The list of illustrious martyrs keeps growing, but with no sign of regime collapse. If anything, this is regime resilience. In that spirit, this afternoon, a written statement read out by someone else from the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who's been neither seen nor heard since his appointment.
At this moment, due to the particular unity that's been created between you, our compatriots, despite all the religious, intellectual, cultural and political differences, the enemy has been defeated.
From an invisible leader to one who wants to be seen and heard all the time. By the way, the brass band was playing We Are the Champions.
Their leaders are all gone. The next set of leaders are all gone. And the next set of leaders are mostly gone. And now nobody wants to be a leader over there anymore. We're having a hard time. We want to talk to them, and there's nobody to talk to. We have nobody to talk to. And you know what? We like it that way.
While he worked that out, Trump kicked off the day with a post on Truth Social, calling his NATO allies cowards for not helping him open the Straits of Hormuz, adding, "We will remember." The conflagration in the Gulf, take your pick, this is an oil refinery in Kuwait, now represents the greatest threat to global energy in history. That's according to the International Energy Agency. A fifth of the world's oil and gas is currently offline, and it could take years to rebuild the destroyed infrastructure. The chief diplomat of one of Trump's coward nations was in Jerusalem today to meet his Israeli counterpart. The French foreign minister came fresh from Lebanon, where Israel is also waging war and preparing for a possible invasion. Are you here to clean up the mess? Are you here to restrain Israel? Goodbye to what we used to call normality. As soon as the foreign ministers left the hotel, from the police siren to another air raid siren to interrupt the day.
Please proceed to the basement floor. Please follow the instructions of the Home Front Command.
Hello? Are you coming to the shelter? And if you're unlucky, this is what happens when you're not in a shelter.
Oh my God!
Or this. Debris from an intercepted Iranian rocket landed in the Jewish quarter of the old city of Jerusalem, just a few hundred yards from the third holiest shrine of Islam, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. But they weren't allowed to pray there by the Israeli police, even though today is the end of Ramadan, not because of falling missile debris, but because the mood is too fraught, the potential for escalation too great. The old city is once again almost deserted. It has seen so much history. What will it see now?
Well, as we've heard, the government announced this evening that the US could continue using UK bases for defensive operations to strike at sites which Iran is using to attack shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's effective closure of the strait has already sent the markets tumbling and pushed the cost of UK government borrowing to its highest level since the global financial crisis. Well, let's get more now from our senior political correspondent, Paul McNamara. Paul.
Yeah. Look, this is an escalation, but the government insists that it's in line with their principles and this is the key bit, with their legal advice that they've been operating under since the start of this war. So previously, the UK was allowing US planes to take off from UK bases to launch bombing raids against Iranian missile strikes that would launch Iranian missiles that would put British interests and lives at risk. Now the government's expanded this, saying actually you can also launch them to protect ships along the Strait of Hormuz. The government is still calling these, quote, US defensive operations. And that language is really key. In the statement that the government put out, there's this, the very last line of it is, quote, that they are acting in accordance with international law and not getting drawn into the wider conflict. But either way, this is still an expansion, and it's a partial win for Donald Trump, who has been less than impressed with the UK's action so far.
With this escalation that we're seeing aside, we also got a clearer picture of the nation's economy. I mean, how bad is it?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've been talking about oil and gas and the knock-on to energy prices since the beginning of this war. That's been feeding into fears of higher inflation. On top of that, there's now real concerns about levels of UK borrowing. All of that has forced up the cost of UK borrowing, and it's a significant increase. Take a look at this. This is the government's 10-year borrowing rate, and it has spiked. It has spiked now. It's now higher than during Liz Truss's mini-budget in 2022, a full percentage point higher. It's the highest in 18 years since the global financial crisis. On top of that, we've got borrowing figures today. In February, the government borrowed about £5 billion more than they expected. We also found out from a very influential consultancy that come July, they expect the annual energy bills to go up by £300. This is all very, very significant.
It is indeed a cost of living crisis. Paul McNamara, thank you very much. Back to you, Matt, in Jerusalem.
Thanks, Aisha. Well, in yet more evidence of the impact of the crisis, the International Energy Agency is suggesting that people try to save fuel by working from home, sharing car rides, avoiding plane travel. Let's look at how the economic fallout from the war has impacted countries around the world. Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the transit route for a fifth of the world's oil and gas, has left more than 3,000 ships trapped. This and attacks on oil and gas facilities across the Gulf have driven up energy prices around the world. Since the war began, the UK has seen a relatively small rise of 6.5% at the petrol pump. But Americans and Australians are paying 23 and 31% more, and Nigerians and Cambodians almost 50%. Asia, known as the world's factory, relies heavily on Middle Eastern oil and gas. Countries there are bracing for the price of everything to go up, and many were quick to introduce fuel-saving measures, like working from home. Thais have been told to wear short sleeves and avoid using air conditioning and lifts. Sri Lanka has made Wednesdays a public holiday. Pakistan has closed schools for 2 weeks, and Bangladesh has closed universities and imposed blackouts. With higher fuel and fertilizer costs driving up food prices, the UN says almost 45 million more people are at risk of acute hunger, especially in Sudan and Somalia, if the war doesn't end by the summer. And global air travel remains severely disrupted as airlines avoid the Middle East. Rising jet fuel prices are making tickets more expensive, and shortages may force other airlines to join Air New Zealand and SAS in cancelling long-haul flights. Well, in Dubai now is Robin Mills, who is CEO of Kmar Energy. He's consulted for international oil companies across the Middle East and Europe. Robin, great to have you on the programme. Do you agree with this very stark and rather depressing assessment from the International Energy Agency that this is the worst disruption, energy disruption, in history?
Hard to argue with it. Certainly in the modern era, certainly in the post-World War II era, there's nothing that comes close to this. In a previous crisis, we might lose 3 or 4 million barrels per day. Now we're staring at a loss of 20 million barrels, plus a large part of the world's gas as well.
So, and this is, taking into account what happened in the oil shock, for instance, in '73, or the various Gulf wars we've had. You're saying this is much worse?
Yes, absolutely, because in those shocks, there was always somebody else who could step in and increase production to compensate. Somebody who wasn't directly involved in the crisis. Now everybody who had spare capacity beforehand is around the Gulf and is disrupted, and that spare capacity has become useless.
And is it also the combination of the Straits of Hormuz being effectively blockaded by the Iranians and oil and gas infrastructure actually being hit as a target both by Iran and in some cases, of course, by the Israelis as well.
Yeah, so the short-term crisis is obviously because the Gulf is blocked and shipping can't get in or out. That cuts off the oil, the liquefied natural gas, and a whole bunch of other important commodities. But that's something that could be resolved, within a few weeks if shipping gets moving again. But as you say, we're now seeing real physical damage to infrastructure, and most seriously, the attacks on Qatar's liquefied natural gas facilities. So 17% of the capacity there is now destroyed. It will take 4 to 5 years to rebuild, even in a post-war setting. And if that physical damage continues, of course, then the recovery period becomes longer and longer, even if the crisis itself abates quickly.
So you've advised governments in Europe and in the Middle East about energy. What would you advise them to do at the moment in this acute crisis?
Well, there's a whole mix of short-term and long-term solutions, and the IEA proposed some, obviously, as we had in 2022 with the cut-off of Russian gas, critical to make sure energy gets to the most important uses, critical to make sure that energy is conserved wherever possible. We use it efficiently, think about energy-saving measures like working from home. But also I'd caution governments against knee-jerk things like taking taxes off energy, putting subsidies on, and other things which restrict supply, which cause disruption, inconvenience, but without tackling the root cause of the problem.
I mean, we've heard some of the advice. The Thai government is telling its people to wear short sleeves, to turn off the air conditioning. Obviously, the work from home thing that we've all heard about, not traveling in airline travel. I mean, this is kind of COVID era, lockdown era disruption, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. So, we've lost, let's say, allowing for some compensation elsewhere, we've lost 10 million barrels per day of supplies, including for some strategic stocks being released, which does help offset that a little bit. And that's indeed like the amount of disruption we saw in the COVID era. We also saw perhaps 10 million barrels a day of loss. But of course, COVID was the opposite. Demand went away, not supply. Indeed, you think about the disruption of COVID, no flying, very little road traffic. That's what it takes to cut 10 million barrels per day or 10% of global oil use off overnight.
And, the British government is constantly trying to reboot growth and comes up with various plans, as do other governments around the world. For the economy, I mean, everything from food production to manufacturing, this is a disaster, isn't it?
It's a big blow right now. It's a shock. And of course, the critical question is, how long does this persist? If it's 1-2 more months, that's bad enough. If it drags on into months and months, as it quite possibly may, then indeed it becomes a long-run crisis. And as you say, it has all kind of knock-ons. Energy is, of course, an input into so many other things, but there's a lot of basic consumer goods that are being affected, and we'll see that coming out of Asia over the next few months. They've all, plastics, for example. Asian producers already cut back output because they can't get the oil and gas to make plastics, and that, of course, feeds into all kind of other goods. Fertilizers for food, that won't hit until the summer harvest. But if you don't put fertilizer on the fields now, then in the summer the food isn't there. So we'll see food price rises, and through a whole bunch of other goods as well.
Depressing stuff. Robbie Mills, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, support for the Iran war among US voters is sharply polarized along political lines. No surprises there, with die-hard Trump supporters overwhelmingly in favor, the majority of others staunchly opposed. However, some leading right-wing figures have also broken with the administration. Our US editor, Anushka Astana, is in Washington now. Anushka.
In terms of the political impact of this war here in the US, so much has happened in the past few days. I almost can't believe it's just been a week. We've seen a senior resignation, Trump's counter-terrorism chief Joe Kent. We've seen claims and counterclaims about US intelligence and whether or not it shows an imminent threat from Iran. We've seen the director of national intelligence say only the president can make that decision, not the intelligence community. And day by day, day, we've seen those attacks by the president on NATO allies and on Keir Starmer, with astonishing language today on the day that the UK has allowed those bases to be used. Now, on top of that, we are hearing of these further deployments of warships and Marines. We're hearing about rising costs, the Pentagon going to Congress for more money for this war. What we don't know is when and how it will end. Republicans, voters are still with Trump, but by the day, it gets more politically difficult for him. Donald Trump wants to show off US military might. But in a week that the Pentagon asked for $200 billion more for this war effort, is the impact of what he calls a Middle East excursion reverberating back home.
It's not clear what exactly the $200 billion would be used for.
Where there are questions about the costs and claims of ground troops preparing to go in.
No, I'm not putting troops anywhere. If I were, I certainly wouldn't tell you.
A denial-ish from a president who told America on day one of this second term that he wanted to be judged like this.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into.
That framing of this presidency, cheered along by Vice President J.D. Vance, has meant pressure over this war ramping up from MAGA voices who have millions of subscribers, like Megyn Kelly.
But there is no question that the American people don't understand why we're doing it.
And Tucker Carlson.
How did Donald Trump, after 10 years of saying one thing, do in the pivotal act of his presidency exactly the opposite?
Who this week interviewed the first big America First resignation, Joe Kent, stepping down as Trump's counterterrorism chief.
Was Iran on the verge of getting a nuclear weapon?
No, they weren't, 3 weeks ago when this started, and they weren't in June either.
That is quite a claim from someone who saw the intelligence. The critique from this wing of the MAGA right is that Trump is fighting Benjamin Netanyahu's war, with public support for Israel slumping in the US. But pro-Israel, pro-intervention Republicans disagree, saying the arguments slip into anti-Semitism. So what do Trump's voters think? The latest poll from Ipsos shows a stark political divide. While just 6% of Democrats and 28% of independents approve of these military strikes, the number rises to 77% for Republicans. That said, 21%, 1 in 5 of voters for Trump's party, do now disapprove.
No war with Iran.
And it's pretty awkward for some around Trump, like Tulsi Gabbard, now Director of National Intelligence, but who was saying this in 2020.
We've got to stop Donald Trump from starting a war with Iran.
So has she had a Damascene conversion? Director, will you say that you support this Iran war? Do you support it? This week, she was tight-lipped when I tried to find out. And when the Vice President was asked if he had expressed his concerns, in the Situation Room, perhaps, he was staying stum too.
I hate to disappoint you, but I'm not going to show up here and in front of God and everybody else tell you exactly what I said in that classified room, partially because I don't want to go to prison, and partially because I think it's important for the President of the United States to be able to talk to his advisors without those advisors running their mouth to the American media.
J.D. Vance suggesting maybe he aired opposition behind the scenes. A hint no doubt designed to support any future presidential bid. After all, he knows that as America's war grinds on in the Middle East, its political impact will only continue to spiral back home.
Well, the military historian and former counselor at the State Department, Professor Elliot Cohen, joins me now from Washington, D.C. Professor Cohen, thanks for coming on the programme. I think you used to be what they're called a neocon, and if I'm not mistaken, I think you were once in favour of regime change.
Excuse me, I don't use that term. I've never used that term. I reject that term.
Okay.
That's the... All right, let's start all over. Well, ask me a question about substance. Let's not use
okay, all right, okay.
Okay?
All right, well, and let's not waste any time either. So are you in favor of this war, yes or no?
I came here as an expert. I did not come to argue for the war or against it. I analyzed it. That's it.
Right. Okay. Well, when you analyze it, do you think it's being done in the right way? Should it have started at all? What does your analysis tell us?
So, look, I've been severely critical of the Trump administration. And if you were to ask me, is this a group of people I would want to go to war with, the answer would be no. And that's because I don't particularly trust Donald Trump, and I don't particularly trust most of his advisors, such as the Secretary of Defense, or for that matter, the Director of National Intelligence. Do I think that Iran is a very, very severe problem for the region and for us? Do I think that even after the 12-day war, there were reasons to be seriously worried about Iran? Absolutely. So, is the war in and of itself illegitimate? I don't think so. Do I have a lot of confidence in this administration? The answer is also no.
So what do you think, judging from your analysis, are the mistakes being made by this administration at the moment in this enterprise?
So the biggest mistakes, I think that, I don't have access to classified information. I don't know what the internal deliberations have been like. But as I've written, and I write regularly in The Atlantic, and listeners can go look at those articles, where I'm particularly critical of the administration is failing to do the kind of political groundwork with the American people, with Congress, and with our allies. When you go to war, for any American president, it's critically important that you have the American people on your side, that you have some sort of authorization from Congress, and that you work together with their allies. And the administration just did none of those things. And that, I think, was, a profound act of strategic malpractice.
I mean, even with the Iraq war, which didn't go entirely according to plan in 2003, there was a real attempt from George Bush to try and sell, the reasons for going to war. And there was an attempt to involve the United Nations, and allies, of course, joined in, and the American public, as far as I remember, was broadly speaking on side. I mean, in this particular case, no allies were consulted apart from Israel. There was no attempt to go to the UN, and there's, a very questionable legality about the whole thing.
Well, I think the UN part of it is a lot less important than securing a congressional authorization for the use of military force. And even with the launch of military operations, making persuasive arguments to the American people why this is in our national interest and the right thing to do. I don't believe that wars have to be authorized by the United Nations, but I do think that you have to convince the American people that it's the right thing, Congress, and you definitely have to work with allies. And George W. Bush did all those things.
Right. Do you think that wars of choice in general are a really bad idea?
That's a ridiculous question. It depends on what the circumstances are, what kind of war you're waging, against who, and for what purpose. There's no general answer to that.
But if you can't make the case for war because it is a war of choice and it's not a war of necessity, and people would argue that was the case with Iraq, and they would argue that's the case here.
Most wars
doesn't seem to end well on the whole.
Most wars are wars of choice. Great Britain chose to go to war against Germany in September 1939 because of Poland. That was a choice. It didn't have to. And that was a very justified war.
And
so I think the idea that you can make a general argument about wars of choice is ridiculous. It depends on the circumstances.
And has this war now become a war of necessity because of oil, because the Iranians have a chokehold on the Straits of Hormuz?
I think you're hung up on these categories, necessity and choice. The question is, what we think the likely conduct of the war is going to be and what we think its results are. And I think that's still very much up in the air. We just don't know.
And how do you think this one will be judged, briefly? And when?
The way it'll be judged will have an enormous amount to do with what the outcome is, which we don't know yet. I can imagine it being seen in many ways as a success. I can see it being viewed as a failure. I mean, I think, one of the problems with the media age that we have, and including the way the media, just about all journalists cover these things, is they think that within 3 weeks you can make a judgment about whether a war is a failure or a success, or how it's likely to end. That's not, I'm a military historian, fundamentally. And I know that that's just not, that's not possible. And as hard as it is to accept it, that is the fact. So we don't know whether this war will be a success or not.
Indeed, we don't. And I think the president likes to judge things on an even more kind of immediate basis than many journalists do. I choose to say thank you and goodbye. Thank you very much, Professor.
You're very welcome.
Now, the war in Iran has meant a subdued start to Nowruz, the Persian New Year, a day which marks the first day of spring and new beginnings, in theory. Our filmmaker in the Iranian capital, Tehran, has been speaking to residents there who have little to celebrate. It's a challenge even to get video footage out of the country, which has been under an internet blackout imposed by the regime for weeks now, cutting it off from the rest of the world. Here's Harry Fawcett.
After 3 weeks of war, some elements of Tehran life look almost normal. Traffic still chugging through its main arteries. Ayatollah Khamenei still surveying it all, even if the slogan acknowledges his death. Beside images of his son and successor, the words, Khamenei has become young, God's hand is revealed. But it's not only Iran's religious leaders clinging on to a sense of constancy. It's Nowruz, the Iranian New Year, and people are determined to mark it, some not just for its own sake.
I think being joyful is actually the greatest form of resistance. The sound of laughter somehow bothers the regime. It's painful for them.
We're calling this woman Tara and disguising her voice. Her Nowruz gathering, smaller than usual.
Being together now is limited only to family. And for me, it's heartbreaking. Because my friends are all scattered everywhere. And when there is a strike, you just want to know if they're safe. Not necessarily have them next to you, but just to know how they are. It's very frightening for me.
In southern Tehran, a woman we're calling Nazanin has also been preparing for the holiday, spring cleaning at home, heading to the local market, too fearful to go into town, only to find flowers at wartime prices she can't afford. So many here haven't worked, haven't earned since the start of the war.
We really believe in this moment marking the start of New Year. The hope that after the harsh winter, all the oppression and injustice, goodness and blessings will finally come. When I hear the news about the killings of regime leaders, I feel happy and hopeful. But the continuation of war and killing of innocent people is equally terrifying. Some nights I really feel I'm on the brink of losing my mind. I keep asking myself, how long are we supposed to endure this war and live like this? And at the same time, I'm terrified it might all lead to nothing.
Celebration alongside terror, holiday shopping alongside unrelenting bombing. Tehran's people reaching for the comfort of shared tradition as they wonder about the shape of their shared future.
Now, while attention is still focused on the war in Iran, the conflict in Gaza has very much not gone away. Since Israel and Hamas agreed a ceasefire in October, at least 670 people have been killed, airstrikes continue, and Israeli troops still occupy around half of the territory. Among the latest strikes, a drone attack on a family home in central Gaza, which killed a mother, father and child and left 3 other children orphans. Jonathan Rugman has this report.
If Gaza's prayers this morning were a picture of composed tranquility, it was also a picture of Palestinians who've survived famine and war. The Eid holiday is a traditionally joyful time, but that's a struggle, like so much else here.
Children have been lost, and my son is still under the rubble. If you find a child smiling at you, unfortunately, inside them lies the darkness of the night.
Lost in her own darkness is 12-year-old Balsam. A few days ago, she was rushing to get ready for school when an Israeli drone bombed her house, killing most of her family.
I was injured less because the living room was not hit like the bedroom. That's where the bomb was. My 3 sisters are dead, along with my mother and father. My mother was pregnant with twins.
Hamza is 6 years old. He's just spotted the whisk his mother used to make cakes in the kitchen. And this is the uncle of the target of this Israeli attack, collecting the drone pieces afterwards. He says his nephew was a traffic policeman and therefore working for Hamas, which is still in charge of the Gaza Strip. In spite of a ceasefire last October, Hamas has not disarmed, nor have Israeli troops withdrawn from over half the land they occupy. And the anger at the latest funerals seems undiminished. Over 670 Palestinians have been reported killed since October's truce. All Hamas's leaders are dead, but their cause has not died with them. Let the whole world witness it, says this man. We are still at war. And with this holiday season, Gaza's graveyards are bursting into bloom.
My son was martyred 6 months ago. I swear that Eid and Ramadan hold no pleasure for me, and life itself holds no pleasure. May my son rest in peace.
يعيط بس يقوم يعيط بس يقوم